and Teaching Aids webinar. Today our focus is on catching up on knowledge of the alphabetic code. My name is Mil Heber and I'm the Literacy Product Manager for MTA, and I'd like to introduce you today to the lovely Joy Allcock. Joy is an independent literacy consultant and a facilitator of teacher professional development throughout New Zealand and internationally. She is the leader of the Shine Literacy Research Project and an author of many literacy resources. Today's webinar will focus on Catch Up Your Code, a classroom resource that will help close the gap in alphabetic code knowledge. This session will be recorded for sharing after the webinar. All registered attendees will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. Any questions, please register them in the chat window. We will aim to answer them at the end of our session here today, otherwise in tomorrow's email. Any additional support that is required after this session, you can email me at mheber@teaching.com.au. Please welcome Joy Allcock.
Thanks, Mel. Well, welcome to everybody, and thank you for attending at the end of a busy day, no doubt, when you probably just need to sit down with your feet up and have a cup of tea, but I appreciate you joining us today. This webinar is about Catch Up Your Code, as Mel said, and it's a resource that was written to help older students gain an in-depth knowledge of the alphabetic code of English. So first of all, I'm going to go through how the code works and why it's so important that students have a really diverse knowledge of the code. I'm going to share some results from 1,220 students who trialled the initial assessment and the teaching resource and show you the progress that they made in just 10 weeks of instruction. I'm going to go through the resource with you and introduce you to the assessment, because the book is built around using an assessment to identify gaps and target instruction to fill those gaps. I'm going to run through a lesson to show you how easy it is to do. 10 minutes a day, that's all it takes for about 10 weeks. And show you the student activities which support the instruction. And at the end, provide you with a plan of action of how to get started. And that's also going to be available to download from the website. So the first thing is we're talking about the alphabetic code, which is the key to understanding written English. And it's hard to explain how significant knowledge of this code is in terms of how it impacts on reading and spelling and writing. So I want to start by just asking you to think about this question. What is a word? If somebody asked you that question, how would you answer them? Just give it a moment's thought. And see what your description would include. I've asked that question many times of teachers in face-to-face PLD sessions, and what I found is that a large number of teachers, their description includes letters or what a word looks like. So they would be explaining it's something you write down, it's something we're used to communicate with, which of course it is. But many people think about words as the written word, when in fact, of course, words exist whether we write them down or not. So a word is something we say first and foremost. We use it as a tool for communicating, and of course we can write it. And that's what this session is about. How do we take the spoken word and turn it into the written word and make it as easy for someone to understand as the words that we say? So let's just work with the spoken word for a minute. How do we make words? Well, they are strings of sounds. So every sound is called a phoneme, and all different languages have different phonemes. Some of them are common and some of them are different. In English, we have 43 phonemes. In Italian, I think there's 27. In Tuvaluan, there's 14 or 15, I can't remember which one. But can you imagine what it's like for a student who maybe comes from a language where there's a small number of phonemes and they're going to learn English? And many of the sounds that are in words they will never have heard before. So that's something to be aware of when you're working with students who are English learners is that many of the sounds you're working with may be unfamiliar to them, and it takes many thousands of exposures to phonemes and words for children, young children, to learn to pronounce them and hear them in words. So words are made up of sequences of these sounds. We put sounds together to make words. Of our 43 sounds, every word we say in English is only made of those sounds in different orders. So here's a sequence of 6 sounds, 4 sounds in 6 different words. Just put them in a different order and you get a different pronunciation. We've got k, o, st, k, ot, s, st, ok, t, ok, s, which is tox, soct, socked, sk, ot, scot. So the same 4 sounds, just by reordering them, we get a different word. So the difference between cost and cots is just the order of the last 2 sounds. But when we say them, and if we have heard the words before, we know what we mean, because the pronunciation of the word leads to its meaning. So the sequence of sounds determines the pronunciation, and that's what leads to its meaning. We can write words, and we can write them in different ways. So some languages write words as whole images. They are like a picture of the word, and those are called logographic languages, like the characters in Chinese, Korean, Japanese. The only way you can read or write those images of the words is by seeing them at first and committing them to visual memory. So you couldn't come across an unfamiliar character and work it out. You need to see it. So they're learned as whole word images. And of course, we learn to read and write words in exactly the same way. But you can also use another technique for recording words, and that is using a code. So some languages, alphabetic languages, use symbols to record the sounds in words. Languages like English, Finnish, Spanish, and many, many other languages. So what we end up with is a symbol for the sounds that make up words. So we've got a D for our D, an O for our O, and a G for our G. Now, I'm not sure of the code for Finnish and Spanish, but the different sounds in those words are written with different patterns, different symbols, but the meaning is still dog. So just because you know how to read one alphabetic language does not mean to say you'll be able to read another one. So written English is a sound symbol language. It's based on what is called the alphabetic principle, which is understanding that the words we say are made of sounds, and the letters of the alphabet are used to represent those sounds in English. The way we use those letters is what the code is. So the alphabetic code of a language shows how letters, alphabet letters, are used to represent the sounds of that language. And that can vary considerably across languages. So you could ask a student for a word with a sound in, and if you wrote it in English and you wrote it in French, for example, or you wrote it in Spanish, you might use an entirely different code to spell the same sound. These spelling patterns that represent the sounds are called graphemes. So if a sound is a phoneme, and the way it's written, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters, is called a grapheme. So even though our code is diverse, it's quite complex. It's not a single pattern for a sound. If we were learning Spanish or Italian, it would be much easier, because once you've learnt the sound and you've learnt the way it's written, it doesn't keep changing. There's not lots of different ways of spelling the same sound or pronouncing a letter or a pattern, but in English there is. But despite the fact that it's quite diverse, there's only 4 types of pattern. So 4 types of grapheme. So you can use a single letter to represent a sound. So a word like d, which is dad, you can write each letter with 1 sound. And all of the words that you see on this screen, every letter represents a single sound. So stamp is st, m, p. Man is m, n. Sometimes that's called the simple code, but because it's only 1 letter for 1 sound. But a grapheme can also be 2 letters, and that's called a digraph, di meaning 2 and graph meaning letters. So 2 letters to represent a single sound. So we've got a word like shock, which is sh, oh, and k. The first sound sh is written with a digraph, sh. The second sound oh is with a simple code, just an O, and the k is written with a ck, another digraph. So all those patterns there all of these words have got digraph patterns in them, and you can see that the digraphs could be two vowels together like an E. They could be a vowel and a consonant like OW, which I haven't put any of the others in, but it could be two consonants like a CH or an SH, like these two consonant digraphs here. So any letters of the alphabet can be combined to form a grapheme for a sound. You can also write a sound with three letters, and that's called a trigraph, although most people aren't familiar with that. We probably tend to call it a letter string or a letter cluster. So a word like sigh, I has an S for this and an IGH for the I. And there are a number of trigraphs. Many of them represent the ear and the air sounds and the or sounds, but the IGH is a very common trigraph that you'll be familiar with. And the last one is four letters for one sound, called a quadgraph. And so we have a word like sleigh, S, L, A, S for S, L for L, and EIGH for A. Most of the all of the quadgraphs have got a GH with vowel patterns. And I just want to say something here about the concept of silent letters. I'm going to go back one. We often teach that the GH in a word like night is silent because the G doesn't have its own sound and neither does the H. But it's an inconsistent approach because here is our N for N, our I for I, and our T for T using the simple code, and the GH doesn't seem to represent anything. But if we went back further and we took this word paint, we say here's a P for P, an A for A, an N for N, and a T for T. Do we say the I is silent? No, we don't. We say, oh no, the AI is the pattern for the A sound. And I think we should use the same approach because a word is a string of sounds. So every letter must belong to a sound. It's better to teach N for N, IGH for I, and T for T, as it is for court. C for K, AU for or, AUGH for or, and T for T. The sound of 8, the EIGH for A, and the T for T. So it avoids this tricky thing of silent letters. The alphabetic code then is the way that the sounds that make up words are written with letters and letter patterns. That's what the code is. Because the code is built around the sounds that make up words, we need to understand how to work with sounds, and that's what phonemic awareness is. It's the ability to recognize and manipulate the sounds that make up words. If you can't use your phonemic awareness skills, learning about the code will not help you, because you have to be able to use your phonemic awareness skills matched and mapped to the code to understand how to read and write unfamiliar words. And that's what phonics instruction is. It teaches code knowledge and phonemic awareness so that students can read and write both familiar words, which they may actually recognize and read them as whole words, or unfamiliar words which they work out using the code. And that's the beauty of an alphabetic code language. You have two ways you can read and write words. You don't have to just memorize everything, every word. You can actually learn how the code works and use that to work out unfamiliar words. So how does the code work? Well, there's 43 sounds of English and 26 letters to write them. And I have asked students, particularly in a secondary school as well, how does this work? 43 sounds to write, 26 letters to write them. How do we do that if we think one letter has one sound? Well, they'll often say, oh no, you write them with more than one letter, you write them with 2 letters. Well, we do, but we also know you can write them with 3 and 4 letters. But what it means is you cannot say one letter represent one sound. You can't teach students, even at 5, that A is an A for apple. First of all, if their name is Amy, it will not work. Basically what you're saying is A is an A for apple, except for all the times when it's something else. So it's not a very good concept to teach. A can be an A for apron, an F for apple, an O for was, an A for about, an O for water, an R for fast. So we want to learn that letters are there to show us what a sound looks like, and that an A can be an A for apron or an F for apple or whatever, rather than teaching one system that one letter has one sound, if we use the alphabet, A, apple, B, ball, C, cat, it doesn't work straight away. What if your name is Christopher and it starts with a C? Sure, it starts with K, but the C is not your K. So we're teaching students a concept about how print works that actually is inaccurate, and it doesn't work when they try to use it to decode and spell words. We also can't just teach that something like the sh sound is spelled sh, because all of these words have got a sh sound in it, and it's not spelled sh. It isn't shut, but chef, shore, action, tension, tissue, anxious, special, mission, cushion, moustache, ocean, and conscious. The sh sound is written in different ways depending on where it comes in a word. And most of us, of course, all of you will know all of these words, but you may not have thought about them having a sh sound in them, because you may be thinking sh is usually an sh. And the answer, it usually is at the start of a word, and it almost always is at the end, but it's almost never an sh when it's in the middle of a word. So students need to understand the diversity of the code. They need to know that phonemes or sounds can be written in different ways, so that they know that the long A sound can be written in lots of different ways. And once they've learned this for the code, we also need to teach them some of the strategies about how do I decide which pattern to use, because there's a really good system, especially for the long vowels, about which pattern you choose, and it depends where the sound comes in a vowel. Now, many teachers don't know that, and why would you know if no one's ever told you? But it makes a huge difference to students to have a system that works when they're working with unfamiliar words. They also need to know that when you pronounce letters or patterns, the graphemes, they can be pronounced in different ways. For example, if you see CH, it could be a ch in chips, it could be a sh in chef, it could be a k in school. The letter S is not just a S as it is in gas. It's often a Z as in his and was and as. The letter C can be a K in can and a S in scent, and the letter G can be a G in goat and a J in giraffe. So this idea of diversity, it's called being set for diversity. It's a cognitive processing strategy that you're teaching students to expect sounds to be written in different ways and to expect graphemes to be pronounced in different ways. And if they start off at the beginning of school with that expectation, then English is easier to understand. It's not a simple language, but if you teach them one letter has one sound, it is never going to work and they get stuck. And I've worked with students at secondary level who are struggling to decode a word, and if you say have a go at working it out, they go through one letter at a time trying to pronounce every letter. That is not how the code of English works. And they do that because that's what they think. That's how they think it works. So if students need to understand the diversity of how the code works, we need to teach it. We should be teaching it from the start. But if we've got older students who don't understand it, we definitely need to unpack it for them. So when we're reading and writing words, we've got two strategies based on whether we've seen the word before and whether we can store the images of words readily. So if we're reading a word, we can read it as a whole image because we've seen it lots of times before and we just recognize it. That's the most efficient way to read a word, but not everybody finds that easy. If we're spelling a word and we've stored it in our print memory and we want to write it, we might just write it from the image that we have in our head. Now, it might be perfect the way we write it, like SAID, or it may come out like this, SIAD, and you'll have lots of students who use all the right letters, but not necessarily in the right order, because they've retrieved the image of the word, and between thinking about it and writing it, the letters have swapped places. Some students never do that and other students do it readily. But what if you can't remember what the word looks like? So you come to a word you're reading and you don't know what it is. If you can recognize the graphemes, which is the code, you can pronounce them, turn them into a sound, and you can blend the sounds in the word together. You can actually pronounce the word. So if you come to this, you think, oh, there's a G, it might be a G, there's an OA, I know that's an O, and there's a T for T. I can go G, O, T, and I can blend the sound together. If I'm trying to write the word and I've never written it before and I don't remember seeing it either, and I think goat, what does that sound like? I hear a G, I use a G. I hear an O, I use an O. I hear a T, I use a T. So you get a word that sounds right. They haven't written got, they've written goat, but they don't know how to spell the long O. And they may have only been at school for a short while, or not. They may have been at school for a long time. They're recording the code using a simple, with the simplest code and the knowledge that they have. And those are the only ways that we can get print on and off the page, using our sight word memory or using a working out process. Of course, other things influence our working out, knowing about spelling rules, knowing about the meaning structure of words, that influences working them out as well. But right now we're trying to teach the code first. Here's a piece of writing from a student who'd only been at school for 4 months that shows how you can use whole word images that she's already developed and working it out. I have a cat. I love my cat. He is ginger and white. So she could write all of the words until she got to ginger, and then she sounded it out. And white. He is naughty. How clever is that for naughty? N-O-T-E. He caught a bird and he put it in the wish house. There is put spelt like foot. He ate the whole of the bird. How horrible. Now, for someone to have been at school for 4 months who couldn't write anything when they started, who's been taught to write the sounds of English one way and break words into sounds, by the time after 4 months, there was no word in that story that student couldn't tackle because they knew how to write all the sounds. Even though the sounds may not be correct, you can read the words. And we know that there are still students well up into upper primary and into secondary who still spell like this because they haven't moved past just recording the code. But you have to be able to record the code first before you can move past it. So I want to show you this diagram to show you where the code knowledge sits. Now this is showing how we grow readers and writers. It starts with a seed, it builds a stalk, and we have the ability to flower into being an author, a person who can communicate their ideas to other people fluently, and a reader, a person who can read other people's ideas and make sense of them. Now that's a big task. Both of those things take a lot of work. They start with a seed, and the seed is oral language. Oral language is the most important thing that a teacher teaches on any day in any classroom from preschool to university. The language of instruction, the language of how we operate in the world is the foundation for everything else. So the stronger that seed is, the stronger the support for building reading and writing. So we've got, when children come to school, a 5-year-old can understand around about 10,000 words. They can speak about 2,500. But they don't know how to read many words. So we're working with, when we work with sounds as our starting point, we're always working with what students know the most about. So our oral language is our foundation. And because words are made up of sounds, then we need to teach children how to play with sounds and words, how to clap syllables, how to hear rhyme, how to hear that Tom and Tina and toe all start with a T. It's not related to letters, it's just sounds. This is pre-school knowledge. This is fun stuff you can do before you get to school. But we have children coming to school who can't rhyme, who can't clap syllables. And yet, if you teach this, if you play with this with 3-year-olds, they can learn to do this. So they use their language to play with sounds. When they come to school, because we know we're working with an alphabetic language, they have to understand that words are made up of sounds now. So instead of just talking about a cat or a dog or a bird, they have to learn to hear that cat is a cat and bird is a bird. But we don't usually go and say, oh look, there's a bird flying into a t-er-e. I think it's got an est in it, t-er-e. It would be ridiculous. But actually that's what they need to do to learn how the code, to give them a foundation for how the code is going to work. So we need to teach them to blend and segment sounds, to make words and take words apart so that we can teach them the code. And we know that the tool for recording the code is alphabet knowledge. So the letters of the alphabet are useful because we're going to use them to write these sounds. And when we do that, we are teaching the code. Now, what I've found from more than 20 years of working with students from preschool to secondary, and actually with adult literacy learners as well, is that when you work from sound to print and you teach children or students of any age to work with the words that they already know, to hear the sounds in those words and find out what those sounds look like. So that's teaching them to spell sounds basically first. That is the easiest and best way to teach it, because you're working with what came before. You're not starting with something with print that they haven't accessed yet. You're using their language, their phonological and phonemic awareness skills, their knowledge of the alphabet to put sounds on the page, to learn to write them. And that's how a sound symbol language like English works. We use letters to write sounds, and we end up with a code. And what that means is when you've learned to write the code and you know that sh is an SH, when you see that in a word, when you're reading, you'll think there's that pattern for sh, and you can turn it back into a sound. And that actually happens automatically. I've seen that in so many situations with young children who have come to school without even knowing the letters of the alphabet, but in a very short time, because we've worked with what they know, which is their language, and we've worked with sounds, and we've showed them how to use letters to record sounds, they start recognizing graphemes very quickly. The more you know about the code, the easier it is to recognize words. It helps you to distinguish between horse and house, for example, because you know the code for or, you know the code for owl. And you learn to retrieve words for spelling, which is much harder than recognizing. When you see a word and you store it for reading, you have many other things that inform your reading: context, sentence structure. If you go to spell a word and you can't remember what it looks like, you may read they, T-H-E-Y, and you spell it T-H-A-Y because you sounded it out. So this is harder. That's what's further up the stem. You need to know more than just what the code, how the code works. You need to know why it works that way. So you need to know something about the structure of words, the syllabic structure of words and the morphological structure. That's the meaning structure of words. You need to learn to recognize prefixes, suffixes, and root words. And then you need to know why. Why does orange end in an E? How do I know whether the G in ginger is going to be a G, a J, or a G? Why does running have two N's? Why does house have an E on the end of it when it's already got an owl with an OU? Now, there's answers to all of those questions. Most of them, the answers teachers may not know, of course, because no one's ever taught you. But this structure and system is really useful to students and teachers, but you cannot teach it if you haven't got a solid foundation back here. So if there's gaps anywhere here, everything else falls over. Once you get to here, you can put words on the page, you can write, and you can get words off the page, you can read, but that is not enough to make you a reader or an author. You need to integrate all these other things: your knowledge of vocabulary and the background knowledge that goes with it, your knowledge of text structure, your critical thinking strategies, your comprehension strategies. When you put all those together, you can become a reader and an author. And that's our goal, of course, is to build fluent, efficient readers and authors. So the problem is we've got a language that has borrowed words from many other languages, and that means that some of our code now has lots of ways of being pronounced. And that's the main issue about the diversity of English. The other problem is that we actually need code knowledge for reading and writing, because reading involves being able to decode words and use your language comprehension skills. Now, you might decode a word by recognizing it as a whole word, or you might have to work it out sound by sound, grapheme by grapheme. But if you can't do that, then it impacts on your reading comprehension. Spelling requires you to retrieve what a word looks like if you can, and if you can't, it requires you to sound out and write the words not known by sight. So again, that involves knowledge of the code. So what it means is that a lack of knowledge of the alphabetic code has a significant negative impact on reading and spelling, and if it has an impact on spelling, it has an impact on writing, because students who cannot spell words efficiently will often not use them, and so the quality of their writing and often the quantity is impacted by their anxiety about spelling. The other problem is that students lack knowledge of the code, and teachers will say, but we teach phonics in the first 2 years, that's where they learn it. But you can't learn everything you need to know about the code in 2 years. There's too much to learn, and many of the parts of the code are not in words that young children would be exposed to. So learning phonics in the early years is not enough. We need to identify gaps in code knowledge and continue to teach them beyond the early years. Teachers don't know that students have gaps in their knowledge either. And when we started with assessment and the trialling the resource, we had teachers with 1,220 students from actually year 4 to year 8. And I remember talking to lots of teachers and saying, well, do you think your students can write every sound of English one way? So if we've got 43 sounds, and we also include writing the qu sounds with QU and the x sounds with the letter X, or other ways as well, because the letter X, they've got to know what to do with an X, it has 2 sounds. Do you think they could write them? And people said, well, of course they can. They write every day. They do it all the time. But when they sat the code knowledge test, only between 1.3 and 7% of those year levels were able to write every sound of English one way, let alone write sounds in different ways. Now, the thing is that they know much more than what those assessments showed. And I've used this example that sometimes when you write something on the computer and you give it a name which is really sensible at the time, and you don't come back to it for a month, when you go to find it, you can't remember what you called it. It's completely gone. It's in there, you know what it's about, but you can't access it. And really that's what this is like. Your students from year 4 up have got brains full of written words, all of which are made up of sounds and all of which are written with the code. But if they haven't got a conscious understanding of how the code works, they can't just access it immediately. And the reason this approach works so quickly is it's giving them a key to unlock what they already know. It's like a treasure map almost. You know, you're going on a treasure hunt without a map, you don't know what you're looking for. As soon as you get a map, you can find it. And that's what we found with the students, is that by teaching them the way I'm going to show you, students made huge shifts really quickly because they already have the knowledge to work with. It's not like a 5-year-old who's starting off without any of that knowledge. This is students who've got lots of knowledge to work with. It's just reorganizing what they already know so they can use it consciously. So for every problem, there is an opportunity. The opportunity is if code knowledge plays a huge part in efficient reading and writing, and we teach it so students consciously know how to use the code, then they make significant progress in reading and writing assessments without necessarily changing anything in what you do with reading and writing. The other issue, we've all had a real, some of us more than others, but our students have been out of our classrooms this year. It's been a really difficult year for teachers and students, and it still is a difficult year for lots of people. So the impact, people are worried about the impact of this COVID-19 break on student progress. The lack of code knowledge existed before COVID-19, and it won't have improved with the lack of not being in classroom, and it's probably got worse. So when your students are back, or even if you're doing this through distance, it's really easy to do this through distance teaching as well, then you can address this critical area. It's just 10 minutes a day over a term, and you can make a big difference quickly. Here are a couple of quotes from Professor John Hattie, who has written the foreword for Catch Up Your Code because based on the impact that the teaching had on student outcomes. But I really like what he says here. He says we need to refocus our efforts to ensure that any actions we take have maximum impact on learning and achievement. We should focus on the things that can have the greatest impact and stop being distracted by the things that don't matter. And the reality is that knowledge of the code is essential. And if you target assessing for the gaps and you teach to close those gaps, it takes a very short time and it has a huge impact on reading and writing. So a small amount of work and a big impact on student outcomes. So just to go over how the book works, it identifies and fills the gaps in knowledge of the alphabetic code. It provides a small amount of instruction, only 10 minutes a day, and a large increase in knowledge which has a flow-on effect in reading and writing, so it accelerates progress with reading and writing. It's easy to use. I'm going to show you how to use it shortly. You use it with your whole class. There's no juggling groups and having some students feel different. It doesn't matter whether the sound that you're teaching, the code that you're teaching on a particular day, some students have done quite well with it. This is based on using students' oral language as a platform. So everybody has got something to contribute that actually accelerates the progress of their peers as well. It requires no preparation or prior knowledge on the part of the teacher, and it just takes 10 minutes a day. So in one term, in 10-minute daily lessons, you can address the gaps in code knowledge and improve reading and writing skills for all students. In our research, we found that it made a difference across the board. Our most capable students made the same kind of improvements as our least capable students. So it worked for everybody. So this is based around an assessment. I feel strongly that we should teach, we should find out what our students know and know what they need to learn before we launch into any kind of teaching approach. So it's based around an assessment, and your assessment is aimed to find out which of the sounds of English students can write in one way and which sounds can they write in more than one way. So I'm just going to ask you to do a little bit of this assessment now. Just if you've got a pencil or pen or you want to do this on your laptop, I want you to write the long E sound as an even in 4 different ways. So we need 4 graphemes for the long E sound. How would you write it? And the same with the long O. Write the long O sound as an open in 4 different ways. So we want 4 different graphemes, not the words, but just the images of that sound. 4 different ways. And then to write the ch sound as in chicken in 2 different ways. And lastly, the f sound as in fish in 2 different ways. Now I'm going to show you some possibilities, and you'll see that every one of these possibilities, there will not be a word on the screen that you do not know, but you may not have been able to think about it as a code for English because you didn't have the right treasure map. You weren't thinking that way. You weren't thinking of the code. You may have found this easy to do and you may have found it difficult. Just because you're a teacher, it does not mean that you know all this in the way that you can teach it. You may not know how to teach it. You may not know how to take it out of the words that you know. And there's no shame in not knowing this because you won't have been taught this yourself, I wouldn't imagine. It's a common thing around the world that teachers are expected to teach stuff that they haven't been shown how to do it. So, but you'll see from this that every one of these patterns, you know them. You just didn't know that you knew it, perhaps. So I'm just going to quickly show you some results from the students who sat this assessment. So the blue lines here are the start of the year, students who could write all between 40 and 45 sounds of English. So in year 4, as you would expect, they would have the least knowledge about the code, but in fact, the year 8s were not particularly better. So what we wanted to see is a shift from the start of the year to the end of the year. It went up a little bit. In year 5, there was a big leap. that particular cohort of year 5s made the most progress in some areas. Year 6, there was a big leap. In year 7, it's all going up. So the number of students who could write most of the sounds of English, between 40 and 45, went up, and the number of students who knew the least, and this is between 0 and 30. Now, anyone who can write less than 30 sounds of English is in big trouble. Big trouble. They're really going to struggle with print. And so we want to see this actually be 0. You can't be below 30. You actually can't really be below 40. In New Zealand, our expectation is that children should be able to write every sound of English one way after 1 year at school. And we've got students who can do that if you teach them how to do it. But we've got lots of students, and here they are, who can't write. There's 15 sounds of English they don't know, and they'll all be vowels, which is a big problem. So the numbers who could write the most sounds went up, and the ones who could write the least went down, which is good. This is knowing different ways of writing the same sound. And so year 4s, we didn't have exactly the same number, so it's not a perfect graph, but I just want to show you that the trend was that after 10 weeks, student knowledge increased considerably across all year levels. We also use the effect size measure, John Hattie's effect size measure, to measure the impact on student outcomes. And this is a bit of an information about it. If you have a score between 0.15 and 0.45, it's a small to medium impact. It means you've up to 2 times the normal rate of learning. If it's 0.45 to 0.75, it's medium to large, 2 to 3 times the normal rate of learning. And if it's 0.75 and above, it's a large to very large impact, 3 times the normal rate of learning. And you can see that the impact they were all 0.6, 0.7, and in year 8 it was 1. So, 2 to 3 times plus the normal rate of learning in just 10 weeks. Now, I'm not going to show you this video. I have to skip over it because it starts, but it is available on the website because we don't have time to run through that. But it's about an 8-minute long video just showing me running this a sound lesson for teaching the code with a group of year 4 and 5 students. So if you want to watch that, you can go to the website, the MTA website, and it'll be on there. This is the plan of action then. If you want to use this approach to improve students' code knowledge and their reading and writing, I'm going to go through this and then I'm going to show you how to do this. Administer the assessment. Mark the assessment. And I recommend, if you want to use the effect size shift, which the information on how to do this is also on the website, that you record your student results in an Excel spreadsheet. Complete the introductory lesson, which I'll show you shortly. Put up your chart on the wall that shows all the phonemes and graphemes. Decide whether you're going to teach to the gaps. Do I just want to use the sounds that most students don't know? Maybe there's 15 or 20, or do I want to start at the front of the book and do all 45 sounds to make sure that it's secure? In fact, when we were trialing this, teachers were going to teach to the gaps, but in the end, everybody decided to do the whole book because they didn't have their own head around it, and it helped them as well to become familiar with the process. So then you teach 1 10-minute lesson a day, and the best place to teach it is before writing, because it naturally leads into writing and spelling, because it's about recording sounds. So it's a good warm-up activity at the start of your writing block. Then the students have a practice activity that supports this. You can do that as a homework activity or some other time during the day. And when you've finished teaching, you just redo the assessment and record it. Record the results and measure the impact. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and show you the book. No, that is not the book. There we go. So this is the way the book works. It starts off with John Hattie's forward. Then we've got the contents show you that the sounds are taught in groups, short vowel sounds, consonant sounds that are often written with double letters, like a P is 1 P or 2, a N is 1 N or 2 Ns, or just written simply, usually one way. A Y is a Y, the Th is a TH. Then there's the long vowel sounds, the other consonant sounds that are written in different ways but not double letters, the other vowel sounds, and the schwa sound, which is the unstressed vowel, and the vowel in an unstressed syllable. There's an appendix. If you've got students who have phonological and phonemic awareness issues, then you can use that to address those issues. And there's some suggestions for how to transfer code knowledge to reading and writing unfamiliar words. There's a glossary of terms, and then all the student activities are in the back of the book. They're photocopy Blackline Masters, including the answers, they're all there. But the activities are also available as a student consumable. So the way the book works is it's got the information which I've just been through with you. Why is code knowledge important? The impact of teaching, so there's the evidence that it works, the way the book works, and then straight to the assessment. Now this is how the assessment works. So we've got students where you're calling out, write the A sound as an apple, the E sound as an end in 2 different ways, the I sound an insect, the O sound an orange in 2 different ways. So I'm going to show you just using this digital one so I can demonstrate to you. If we were writing the A sound, we'd have an A, the E sound. We could, so every box that is, it's white on the Blackline Master, the grey boxes you don't write in. We know there's only 1 sound for A. There's 2 sounds for E. There's 1 sound for I, or 1 grapheme, sorry. There's 1, how do we write the O sound? Well, there's an O, the A in watch. Here is the A sound, a U as in cup, an O as in love, and an A as in about. How do we write the O sound? An O as in look, and a U as in put. So then we can just record the totals here. And 1, 2, so this happens to be all correct. And so then we've got 11 out of 11. So the reason this is in a box like this is because you can see at a glance whether a student knows a lot about short vowels or not. So they may do really well on the short vowels, and you get down to the long vowels, and that's where everybody falls over, and you find that long vowel knowledge is very poor. So this is helping you to kind of zone in, if you like, on what needs to be taught most. If you're going to pick and choose what you teach, you can use these assessments this way. I just go back to the, so that's the assessment, and then you decide how you're going to teach it, but you're going to teach the introductory lesson, which is what I've just been through with you, how words are made, that they're strings of sound, how the code works, and how that can be 1, 2, 3, or 4. So what I've just been through with you is the first lesson for your students, because they need to know that. And then you just pick the sounds, or you start at the beginning of the book and start teaching. So I'm going to just take a lesson now and show you how it works. So it's going to be like speed lesson really, because we haven't got a long time. But if you were in a classroom, you're deciding you're going to teach the K sound. So you're going to draw on your whiteboard a blank chart like this, and send your students off in groups. I think it's the best way to do it. And say, now you've got 3 minutes to write as many words as you can that start with K, that have K in the middle or K at the end. And when they've had the time, you've got to be quick because the whole lesson's only going to be 10 minutes max. They come back in a group and you say, right, who could give me a word that started with K? And somebody might give you capital. Okay, so who can give me another word? And you might get comic. So because you're going to do this quickly, you say, okay, who could tell me what is the pattern for the K in capital? It's a C. What letter or letters? What about in comic? It's a C. Who has got a word on their sheet that starts with K that is not written with a C? So this is a quick way of getting the sounds there. Who's got a different pattern? Oh, somebody says kitten. Okay, so, and what is the pattern for the K in kitten? It's a K. Has anybody got another kind of pattern? So you might have someone who says, oh, my name, Chris. Okay, so what's your pattern for K? It's a CH. Has anyone got another pattern? Now the thing is, in the book, you will have all the other patterns there, and you could see a word like Q, which you know your students will know what that word means, but no one's thought of it. but you can't write the word down. You have to, somebody in your class has to give it to you. So you can give them a clue. You could say, okay, I'm thinking of a word that starts with k, and it describes something we have to do. Say we're all going over to assembly and we're going to line up. What's another name for our line? Or when we're catching a bus, what's it called? And someone's going to probably say queue. If nobody can tell you queue, it means that word is unknown, then you can't use it. But you can use it. You can give clues to get different patterns, but the word that you put up there has got to come out of a student's mouth, not out of your head only. It can come out of your head, but it's got to go through the channel of somebody thinking of it. So now let's think about words with a k in the middle. We've got action. Has anyone got a different pattern? We had packet. We've got walking. We've got, what else have we got? Oh, here's one. Soccer. Now say you've done this, you've got the C in action, you've got the K in walking, you've got a CK in packet, and that's all you got. You could say, who can tell me another name for a game of football? It's played with a round ball. What else could we call it? You kids are all going to know soccer. So then you can put soccer on the board, and you can give the double C. And what about at the end? We've got picnic. There's our C. We might have park. We might have unique. You know, you can brainstorm that. You can give the clues for that word, and you might have a word like ache, which is just the, so we've got a C in picnic. And your students can help you with this. So what's the pattern in park? It's a K. What's the pattern in unique? It's QUE. What is the pattern in ache? And it's just the CH because the E belongs to the A. That's the long vowel pattern. So this is how easy it is to do. You're just recording it like this and looking at what we found for spelling the K sound. And if you go back to, I'll just find the page. Oops, sorry, there it is. Here is your lesson. So this is exactly what I've just done. Students, you're going to have the blank box, but there are the examples for your benefit. You don't write these words on, but if somebody came up with a word like key, for example, that kind of key, and you think, oh, which bit of key is the key? You'll be able to see that it's over here. So it's giving you the answers to work with. Then you can say to your students, well, what do we find out about? Where does it occur in words? Beginning, middle, and end of words. It's in all those places. Some sounds do not go in all those positions. Some sounds don't go on the end of a word, for example, or they don't go at the beginning. But k is at the start of words, it's inside words, and it's also at the end. And what did we find out about it? Well, what are the most common patterns? C, K, and CK. But we found other patterns as well. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see some orange writing. And this is information for you as a teacher about how we spell the K with a K. How do I know when to spell K with a C or a K? The answer's over here. How do I know when to use a CK at the end of in a word to spell K? Well, it always goes after a short vowel that's spelt with a single letter. So pack and peck and pick have got a single short vowel letter, and it's followed by a CK. But look, which has a short doesn't have a CK because it's not a single vowel. The is a double vowel pattern. How do I know when, so why does picnic have an IC and pick have an ICK? Well, any word that's more than one syllable that ends in ick is spelt IC. Fantastic, terrific, picnic. There's many of them, but if it's a one syllable word, it'll be ICK. So for every single sound, there are little rules, and wherever there is a rule, it's written in the side. So you can look this up and find it. You don't have to teach it, but if someone asks you a question of why, the answer's probably going to be there. What I've found with the teachers who've been using this, you know, who trialled it and have been using it since, is they said in the beginning, they just read that and thought, oh, I never knew that, but they never used it. But now that they're more familiar with the process and they're working with students, they're actually starting to introduce some of that knowledge. When students ask them why, they'll say, let's look it up. Oh, wow, fancy that. And kids start looking for a system in words, which is pretty amazing, really. But students really like having a system. They're very strategic. So I'm just going to show you the student activities now so you can see how they work. And this is an interactive one here for me to demonstrate, but these are available as photocopy masters. And what the students are doing is deciding which bit of this word is a k. What am I going to highlight for the k pattern? So we've got all these patterns here. Let's see what else we've got. A double C, oh, we've already got that. So we've got a CK. So they're going to go through each of the letters, highlight the pattern, and then they're going to write what they found. They found a C and a K and a CK and a CH and a CC and a QUE. So whatever they've found here, they're going to record. I won't do all of them. And that's the first part of the lesson. The second part is how many syllables are in these words. Now, providing the student can read the words, they don't have any trouble with this. So account is 2 syllables, chaos is 2, caterpillar is 4, helicopter is 4. If you've got students who get this wrong, it would be worth just asking them, say the word aloud. So it may be the fact that they can't read the word, but you need to know whether it's they can't read the word to get to the syllables or whether they actually can't hear them. Because if you say the word caterpillar and they can tell you it's 4, then you know it was reading that was issued, not hearing the syllables. But the next part is something that most students don't find easy because it's a different way of thinking about words. A syllable always contains the sound of a vowel. So that's what makes a syllable a syllable. It has a vowel sound in it. So every time you hear a new vowel sound, you hear a new syllable. Now, a vowel sound has to be written using a grapheme, doesn't it? If you're going to write a sound, so we're looking to see what does the vowel sound in each syllable look like. So here is the vowel sound in account, the A and the A and the OU. What about in chaos? The first syllable, it's an A. The second syllable, it's an O. Caterpillar, the first syllable, it's an A. The sound, as we say caterpillar, even if you roll your R's, that is the vowel pattern. And there's the I, and there is the last sound on the end, caterpillar. Helicopter, an E for an E, an I for an I, an O for an O. I've just coloured it all in, but you know what I mean, and an ER for the A. So that bit there is not so easy because it's not the way we've normally taught students to look into words. So it might be something you could do together on the board just to support students. So just back to our plan of action: administer the assessment, mark it, do the introductory lesson, put your chart on the wall, decide, am I going to teach every lesson or just some lessons? Use it as a warm-up to writing. Make sure your students complete the practice activities. They don't take very long. And when you finish teaching, redo the assessment and measure the impact that you've made on your students. So I've just about got to the end and I don't know whether we've got questions.
Hi Joy, we have a few questions.
Yep.
And if we don't get time to answer them all, look out for the email that everyone will receive tomorrow, please. Alex asked, when you referred to 2 methods of reading, so 2 ways to decode, Alex was wondering what you mean by recognising words. Do you mean memorising sight words?
Yes, I mean, when you've seen a word, the same way that people learn Chinese, when you've seen a word often enough, and for some students that's only like twice, and for others it's like 200 times, that word is a visual memory, and when you see it next time, you know that word says goat, because as soon as you see G-O-A-N-T, that pattern, you know it says goat. So that's a way of whole word recognition, is something all of us do, and it is the quickest way to read a word. So we have that strategy, the same as Chinese, but the Chinese characters, you can't decode them, you can only read them that way. So the 2 ways of reading words are, do I recognise it? Can I just say that word, read that word, recognise its meaning from looking at it? And the answer might be yes, that's one way. If I can't, then I've got to use information in the word to pronounce it. and it may be using the code to get to the pronunciation, and it may be using other knowledge like reading by syllables or reading a prefix, a suffix, whatever. Those are the things that allow us to use parts of the word to put it together to get to the pronunciation, and it's the pronunciation that leads to its meaning. I hope that's answered what you meant.
Thanks, Joy. Someone was asking, would they have access to the research paper where this study has come from?
Yes, I can give you that. I'll put it on the website. Yep.
Thank you. Next question. What year level would you do this assessment with?
The earliest year level would be year 4. That is a bit of a stretch at the start of year 4. You can use that, because actually it shouldn't be. You should be able to write any sound of English at the end of year 1. But in reality, the assessment, it's not the way we've taught children to think. So it's not that the assessment is hard, it's the way of thinking that's hard. So I would use this from year 4 at probably the earliest, unless you have in a school where in the first 3 years there is a lot of teaching of the alphabetic code, in which case you might be able to use it in year 3. But in most cases, I would say year 4 at the earliest. And we've used this right through. We've used it at the secondary. And I'll tell you now, the results at year 9 and 10 are exactly the same as the year 4 to 8s were. And if anyone's working with adult literacy learners, it's a perfect tool to use for them, because they'll have those same gaps.
Thanks, Joy. The next question. Does the lesson get recorded for student access? For example, the word bank and patterns they just shared. Is that now an anchor chart or something for students to refer back to later?
Yeah, they have. They can make up their own. You know, students record their own. They make their own little charts and they record them. They can write the words as you're putting them on the board, so they can go back to it afterwards. Yes, it's part of the instructions on how the lesson works.
Thank you. Catherine asked, is the program successful in teaching and helping dyslexic students?
Yes, absolutely. It definitely is.
Okay. I suppose you've just recently answered this. Adele asked, would you use this 10-minute lessons for P to 2 to complement other spelling, reading and writing programs? But you've basically touched on that.
No. We've nearly finished a resource that is for the first 3 years at school that uses exactly the same principle, but you have to teach a little bit differently because they don't have the words in print to access, if that makes sense. They've got the oral language to work with, which is what we do, but we wouldn't expect them to develop the same diversity in those early years. We're building towards that. But the same principle of teaching from sound to print, using that, you know, the sprout diagram, that's exactly the way you work. So that is nearly finished. This is plugging the gaps with those, you know, further up the school.
Thanks very much, Joy. Well, that seems to be the questions from today. So we might do the final slide.
So thanks everybody for attending. It's I know it's always tough at the end of a day, and I really do wish you well for the rest of this year, given that it's going to probably carry on being tough, I guess, for everybody. If you've got any questions, you can email them, I think, through. Is that right? Any other?
That's right. mHieber, M-H-I-E-B-E-R @teaching.com.au. Thanks for your time today, Joy, and for everybody's time. And a link was also given inside the chat today, a link to the resources. And please look out for your email tomorrow where you'll have any access to PDFs or anything we discussed today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.